Hi everyone, welcome to episode 2 of Makeup and Wake Up. If you missed last week's episode, which is all about the 13th Amendment and how the government really used prison as a loophole to continue slavery after the Civil War, that video is going to be very important. It has a lot of good knowledge and history and fits in with what we're talking about today, which is prison abolition. We are talking about what it looks like to abolish our prison system. So while I do my makeup today, I'm going to take you guys through what prison abolition means, why it is important, what abolishing prisons will look like, and also address any questions that you guys had asked me on my Instagram. I just want to take a quick moment and thank all of you guys who showed up and watched last week's video. Make sure that you're sharing this series with your friends and family because knowledge is key, knowledge is power. My goal is to spark a curiosity and interest in social issues, and the more people that know, the more people will get involved and the faster change will come. So before I really talk about what prison abolition is and go into detail on what that's going to look like, I want to start out by highlighting two very important women that play a big role in prison abolition, the idea of prison abolition. Ruth Wilson Gilmore and Angela Davis are human rights activists and also prison abolitionists. A lot of times when the topic of prison abolition comes up, you'll hear these two names. Between the two of them, they have so many articles and interviews and speeches. I know Angela Davis was heavily referenced and showcased in the Netflix original documentary 13th. That's an amazing documentary. I very highly recommend it. But these two women are incredibly intelligent, so when you get done with this video and you have more questions and curiosity about prison abolition, I highly recommend that you give those two women a Google search to find any of their interviews or books or speeches and read up on what you can. To start out this video, I want to recite a quote that Ruth Wilson Gilmore said to the New York Times. She said, "Instead of asking whether people should be locked up or go free, why don't we think about why we solve these problems by repeating the kind of behavior that brought us to the problem in the first place?" Our prison system is a hideous cycle that keeps repeating itself. It doesn't work. It hasn't worked. So these two women and many, many other prison abolitionists really want prison reform, policy shifts, and long-term investment in communities to help solve the problems, because prisons are not solving problems. So what is prison abolition? Prison abolition is basically just the movement of wanting to abolish prisons. Throughout this video, I really encourage you to maintain an open mind and also remember that a lot of the questions that you guys have will be answered throughout the video, so just keep your ears open, keep your eyes open, keep your mind open throughout this video. Prison abolitionists want to abolish prisons and replace it with transformative justice. In the society that we live in, we oftentimes fight violence with violence. So how transformative justice would work would basically be that violence and harm would be met with alternative means rather than more violence in order to lessen the violence that is happening. So along with that, prison abolitionists want to build a society based on care and mutual aid and community accountability. So definitely wanting to transition into a society that takes care of each other and invest in people's futures and invest in education and healthcare so that we can live in a society where we are all cared for, all of our needs are met. So along with all that, our current prison system is really designed to control and profit off of people marginalized by gender and race and class and also disability, and it also does protect the rich and powerful. The rich and powerful also commit crimes, but they do not suffer the way that underprivileged people suffer. They're able to pay their way out of it. They're protected by the system. They usually don't pay the price for their actions and they can just continue on living like normal. So the system itself is just so unfair and it really does need to be addressed that way. So here comes the idea or the question that a lot of people are concerned about. Don't prisons reduce crime and keep people safe? Not really. In theory, one could argue that prisons house criminals, and that means less criminals on the street, but that is not sustainable, and that does not promote long-term problem solution. Prison abolitionists believe that if we really do want to reduce crime, then we need to abolish our current prison system. Incarceration doesn't protect anyone from daily encounters with violence, and the prison industrial complex is built on abuse of power that is fueled by isolation and control, and it doesn't really do anything to promote a healthier society or promote individual change within any of the inmates. There's really not a lot of rehabilitation going on in prisons because there is so much abuse of power going on within prisons. Prisons also don't do anything to support people that have fallen victim to violence. Prisons really aren't offering any long-term stability to those victims' lives. So prisons don't really have anything in place to help the emotional well-being of victims or the physical well-being of victims. There's nothing in place to sort of help that side of the crime. And prisons don't offer actual justice. There's a lot of people in power that just are able to run free, do what they want, continue carrying out acts of violence and crime, stealing and raping and doing horrific things. And these people are just overwhelmingly protected by the law because they are rich and powerful. So prisons don't offer actual justice for everyone. So a big reason why there needs to be a push for abolishing prisons and abolishing the prison system as we know it is because there is a huge problem with abuse of power within our prisons. But our current prison system harvests a really unhealthy power dynamic between the prison guards and inmates, which really results in a lot of abuse of power and a lot of abuse towards prison inmates that oftentimes leads to serious injury and even death, unfortunately. So down below I am going to leave a link to a website that has a ton of stories where prison guards abuse their power and it results in the death of an inmate. But I am going to share one of those stories with you now. 8 years ago, actually, on the dot, so June 23rd, 2012, a 50-year-old man named Darren Rainey was serving 2 years in the Florida Dade Correctional Institution for non-violent drug charges. He just was charged with possession of cocaine, non-violent, and was serving a 2-year sentence. So Darren Rainey was a diagnosed schizophrenic. So he is a 50-year-old black male with a mental illness living in a prison for 2 years on non-violent drug charges. So on this day, June 23rd, 2012, Darren Rainey decided to smear feces all over himself. There wasn't a reason to it. He's mentally ill. That's the reason. The prison system does not have a way to treat this type of illness. So the prison guards confronted him. They told him to clean himself up, and Darren Rainey refused to. So instead of trying to de-escalate the situation or seeking out a professional, the prison guards decided to handcuff Darren Rainey. They handcuffed him to the shower and then they poured scalding hot water onto his body. They repeatedly did this horrific act for 2 hours. So this poor man had to stand there handcuffed to the shower for 2 hours as 2 people poured boiling hot water on his body. He was screaming in agony. He was screaming for his life. The prison guards continued to taunt him and ask how his shower was going and just dehumanize this poor man. Darren Rainey unfortunately did die from the situation. So these 2 prison guards murdered this man as a result of their abuse of power. And Darren Rainey's last known words were, "I can't take it no more. I'm sorry, I won't do it again." And according to reports, he kept repeating this over and over again until he died. When a cleanup crew was called in to clean up the mess that these prison guards had made, there were reports of chunks of skin that had melted off of Darren Rainey's body that were left in the shower. Can you imagine this horrific act of torture? For what? Because this non-violent man was having a schizophrenic episode? Excuse me? Who does this protect? What kind of rehabilitation is this? And how can someone rationalize this man's death? And why do we think this won't happen again? Because it absolutely will, and it has. Throughout this series and many of the topics that I discuss, we're going to see the common theme of the redistribution of wealth that needs to be put in place. Money from prisons and police need to be rethought and then reinvested in different parts of the community. The inequality in wealth and opportunity that this country has really does create a crime breeding community, and that's what the system wants. The system wants to continue incriminating people, continue housing prisoners, because it is so profitable. But we, the people, cannot like that. We can't like that if we want to protect our neighbors. We want to protect other humans. The government and the people in power, there's a lot of money in that system and they want to maintain it. We might think otherwise, we might feel otherwise, but they don't really care about us if they want these crime breeding communities to thrive in the way that they want, so that they can continue imprisoning them and continue making profit off of them. But as normal, decent humans, I would hope that a lot of us would see the issue in that and want to change it. We want to get rid of prisons. We want to abolish the police. We want more investment in jobs and education and health and housing. We need these things. That poor man, Darren Rainey, would not be in that situation if he had the necessary resources to help treat his schizophrenia. I'm going to move on to answering some of your questions right after I do my lips. All right, so your questions. I asked you guys on Instagram if you guys had any questions about prison abolition, and for the most part, everyone had the same sort of question. So I'm going to be addressing those now. So question number one, have other countries done this and how did it go? So not necessarily. Corruption within prisons is not unique to America. This happens all over the world. But I think it's important to keep in mind that just because it hasn't happened before, and just because we don't have another country to look at for inspiration and guidance and to see how this works, doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it, or it doesn't mean that we shouldn't work towards having it, because although we may be scared of the unknown, we have good intentions. We want to build a better community, and we want a better community to be built as a result of prison abolition. That is what our good intentions are. We don't want to continue the modern day slavery that is happening right now within our prisons. We don't want communities to have to suffer at the hands of police brutality. We do not want underprivileged communities to exist. We want all of our communities to have equality across the board. We want better education within our communities. We want better healthcare within our communities. And just because this hasn't been done before, just because equality hasn't been offered to everybody before, doesn't mean we shouldn't try to pursue that, especially when you think about how our current prison system was not built on good intentions. It was built on the idea of making more money and to continue hurting groups of minorities and to further white supremacy. So question number two is, what other options / alternatives to prisons are there? So alternatives to prisons would just be to invest in better public safety and just invest in the community overall. Putting more funding into housing and education and healthcare will overall reduce crime rates. So we need to be continuing to look at the bigger picture and more sustainable solutions to crime, because prison is not a sustainable solution. It is not stopping crime from happening. It might be housing criminals, but there is not a sustainable solution to stop crimes from happening. It is just a ugly, violent, racist system that needs to be stopped. We need to stop supporting it, and we need to look at other options for long-term sustainable solution, which looks like investing in communities. Another alternative would be to decriminalize a lot of different behaviors. So basically that would mean to stop putting people in prison for mental illness, stop putting people in prison for poverty and non-violent drug crimes. There are other ways to handle those sorts of things. First of all, mental health and poverty could be solved by putting better resources into the communities. And then non-violent drug crimes, the majority of those drug crimes are marijuana related. Let's decriminalize marijuana. So one of the biggest arguments and questions that arise when talking about prison abolition is, where do all the violent prisoners go? We need to understand that when speaking about abolishing prisons, especially in our day and age, we cannot possibly mean that we are going to be wiping out all prisons. It does not mean that prisons are getting demolished and that we're sending everyone home. It doesn't mean that. We need to start looking at prison abolition as abolishing the prison system that we know. I'm going to put up a really shocking graph. I should have realized this sooner before including this particular graph in this video, but the graph that I'm about to show you guys and talk about is actually a graph that represents the prison inmates in a federal prison, which is a lot different than a state prison. It's going to represent a different community of people. So it definitely doesn't represent the entire prison system that we've been talking about throughout this video. However, the statistics are still startling and they still apply to what we are talking about and still apply to why we should think about abolishing prisons and abolishing the prison system that we know and looking to find other means of dealing with these sorts of situations for you guys to see. But when people think about prison inmates, I'm sure the first thing that comes to mind is someone violent, someone who may have murdered someone or raped someone, someone who harmed children. We tend to think automatically that they are violent and deserve to be behind bars. But this graph shows you how incredibly wrong that assumption is. People who are in prison right now for drug-related crimes make up nearly 50% of the amount of people that are in prison. And then to compare that to our violent criminals, the people who are in jail for sex offenses make up nearly 10% of the prison population, and the people who are in jail for homicides and violent assaults and kidnapping make up about 3 to 4% of the people that are in prisons right now. So the violent criminals that you are concerned about make up 14% of the prison population, where people who are in prison for drug-related crimes make up 50% of the prison. Another way we can think about prison abolition would be to stop the production of prisons. We have more than enough prisons in the US to house that 15% of violent criminals that make up the prison system already. We have enough room. We could honestly get rid of like 80% of the prisons that we have and still have enough room to house these actually violent criminals. And then we can replace those prisons with hospitals and schools and rehab facilities and more housing. And those institutions are way more sustainable and bring way more wellness to a community than a prison does. So I'm going to leave you guys with some final thoughts. We need to take a step back from focusing on the rapists and the murderers when talking about prison abolition. Although these people carry out horrible, horrific, senseless acts of crime, it really takes away the goal of prison abolition, which focuses on the overwhelming population of people that are in jails for non-violent crimes. These people do not deserve to be grouped with rapists and murderers, and they also do not deserve to be spending their days doing prison labor, working for pennies a day in horrible, horrible conditions. The prison abolition movement wants to focus on giving communities what they need to avoid crime and violence so that it can stop happening in the first place. place. The prison abolition movement is not trying to fight for murderers and rapists to get out of prison. They're wanting to better communities and help people who don't deserve to be in prisons. Rape and murder are absolutely punishable acts that should be handled by a justice system. However, unfortunately, our justice system has a lot of ingrained racism within its ideals. And next week, we'll get into that by talking about what it looks like to abolish the police and why we should be talking about that and feeling comfortable to talk about that. So that was a lot of information. That was a lot of what ifs and theories and ideas. Prison abolition is not something that is really in the works right now. It's been studied very heavily by a lot of scholars and a lot of people that really want to see this come to fruition, but there's not a lot being done on the actual prison abolition movement. That's why it is important to be open-minded about the topic of prison abolition instead of fearing it. And it's important to know what prison abolition looks like. So I really hope that this video helped you decide where you stand on prison abolition, and it helped you kind of diminish your concerns and confirm your ideas on prison abolition. If you have any further comments or questions, please leave them down below. The comment section is a safe spot. And if you watched this video and you felt like there was anything that I missed out or there was anything that you would like to add, definitely leave it down below. I'd love to continue having these conversations with you in the comments, and absolutely reach out to me via Instagram if you have any other conversation pieces you want to address, or just anything you want to see me cover in the future. I am totally down to hear it. But that is going to be it from me. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you again in next week's Makeup and Wake Up, where we talk about abolishing the police.